So we're joined by Pam for our keynote this evening. Pam is played by Tommy Greenler, who is a drag performer and musician living in Atlanta, Georgia. They were born and raised on a small farm in rural Wisconsin to a Quaker family and spent much of their childhood very involved with monthly meeting, yearly meeting, and FGC Quaker youth programs. Currently, they are a member of West Branch Monthly Meeting affiliated with Iowa Yearly Meeting Conservative. They have had an interest in drag since high school, but started performing publicly in 2018, which is also when they adopted the name Pam. They have done drag in clubs and other LGBTQ+ venues in Wisconsin, Chicago, and Atlanta, as well as taken a leadership role in the organization of their university drag show in Atlanta. While the pandemic has certainly limited the opportunities for drag performance, Pam is currently a university student studying music composition and has spent the last year channeling their creative energy into writing and producing original music. So I am putting all of my praise and hands into the air for Pam and welcoming you to Philadelphia Yearly Meeting's annual sessions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zachary, for that introduction. And yes, thank you all for being here tonight. It is funny, I have my first note here is to introduce myself, which Zachary just did a really good job of doing. But again, if you're just coming in, my name is Pam, also known as Tommy Greenler. I grew up in rural Wisconsin, but currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm actually currently joining you from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm staying with my parents and visiting them for the first time since before the pandemic. My pronouns in drag preferred pronouns are she, her, hers, but outside of drag, I am pronoun flexible and respond to any pronouns used out of respect. And yeah, I'm a little bit nervous, but very, very excited to be giving a keynote presentation here at Philadelphia Yearly Meeting about drag and spirituality and my spiritual journey with drag. So again, thank you all for being here. And yeah, I started the presentation here with a couple quotes by RuPaul Charles, who is probably the most famous living drag queen in the world today. And I just wanted to read the second quote because this quote really spoke to me and sort of spoke to what this presentation is going to be about. I'm talking about in this presentation drag as a spiritual practice for myself. And I think this speaks to why it is a spiritual practice for me. He says, the deeper level of drag is all about you're born naked and the rest is drag. And that's political. It's very punk rock. It's very radical. It's this idea that you are not your body. You are an extension of the power that created the whole universe. That's drag. We are all God in drag. So I get the question a lot as a drag performer. What is drag? What constitutes drag? Who gets to decide what is and what isn't drag? And it's funny, I find it very similar, a very similar question in many ways to when people ask me, what is a Quaker? What does it mean to be a Quaker? What do Quakers believe? They're very difficult questions to answer. And I say, if you ask what is a Quaker to 100 different Quakers, you're going to get 100 different answers. And I think the same is true if you ask what is drag to 100 different drag performers, you'll likely get 100 different answers. To start the presentation, just typed drag and looked up in Google Images to see some of the top results. And these were some of the top results that came up. And I think that this shows a pretty good variety of what drag is in in our modern day. There's a lot of different kinds of drag performers who present themselves in different ways, who perform in different scenes, some who don't perform at all. For myself, I would generally describe drag as something that involves theatrical or exaggerated expression, self-expression, usually playing with traditional gender signifiers. Traditionally, drag personas are the opposite of what a performer's gender assigned at birth was. So people who were assigned male at birth often perform as drag queens or have feminine drag personas, and people assigned female at birth are drag kings or have more masculine personas. This is not always the case, but that is traditional for drag. Because of sort of the expanse of drag, there's a lot of confusion about the differences between drag and cross-dressing and trans identity. And there's some very valid confusion there. I'm going to talk a little bit about drag history, where the overlap between some of these identities has been in the past. And I also just want to validate for those who might be confused about some of this terminology, that it is confusing and that there is some overlap as well. Even in my life, there has been some overlap. I've used drag a lot in my own life to explore my own gender identity and preferred expression, and to kind of come to terms with a trans identity for myself. And it's not been a linear path at all. So the confusion is natural, but I think keeping an open mind and being ready to learn and listen to people's individual experiences is kind of what's key here, and what I've found holds drag communities together, because people approach drag and come to drag from really different walks of life and personal experience. So I'm going to start again with a little bit of drag history. Drag has been around forever, because the need for flexible gender expression has existed forever. The picture on the left shows a drag artist or somebody in drag in the 1800s. And the one on the right is a picture of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two very influential, they were called drag queens. Many historians today consider them or say they would have been trans women in today's society, but they called themselves drag queens during the day. They were very, very instrumental at Stonewall and in the early LGBTQ rights movement. Drag in the 20th century has a very political genesis. We saw, especially in America and much of the Western world, a narrowing of legitimate gender expression in the 20th century. And out of this came the modern LGBT rights movement and what is today modern drag culture. After Stonewall, gay bars became the most common safe spaces for gay people, specifically gay men, and drag, again, mostly drag queens, became a central part of the culture of gay bars. And that was true for many, many years, but I also want to, again, mention, like with Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, note that drag culture has always been inclusive of, and not just inclusive of, but truly shaped by trans people, trans individuals. But in recent years, this is also actually 20th century, many drag cultures began to sort of develop parallel to one another. There was a pageant drag scene. Many drag queens would compete in pageants sort of modeled after sort of Miss America type pageantry, but for drag queens and trans individuals. There was camp performers who would host events at gay bars across the country. There were the ballroom scene started in the late 70s, early 80s in many large metropolitan area for as a safe space for queer people of color specifically to express themselves, express their gender identities. And then towards the end of the 20th century, drag began to cross over into mainstream, being seen in Hollywood films, occasionally on television shows. It was a slow sort of just here and there process at the beginning, but as we've moved into the 21st century, drag has really managed to break into the mainstream. I talk about in the 21st century there being also a gender revolution, or perhaps I've heard people also call it the non-binary revolution, which is a cultural shift, especially I think in this country where people are looking beyond the gender binary, are recognizing that there are more than two genders and people aren't, there's a variety of gender identities and experiences within even trans identity, then transitioning from the one gender to the other. And with this non-binary cultural revolution, drag culture has also changed a great deal, and it's become a lot more expansive, a lot more inclusive. We see a lot more drag kings. We see a lot of bearded drag queens who claim femininity and express femininity and are drag queens, even with the facial hair that they grow on their face naturally. We've also seen a lot of makeup artists that go more avant-garde, sort of again, leave the gender binary completely, attempting more artistic makeup, perhaps horror makeup. We've seen also television shows, RuPaul's Drag Race and Boulet Brothers Dragula are the two most popular that have really popularized drag within especially the LGBT community, but also to a wider audience as well, and shown a great variety in what drag artists do and how these people identify and where they come to the art of drag. Of course, there's also continues to be both cisgender and transgender drag performers. The culture and community would not be what it is without either cis or trans performers, and it's an incredibly important part of the communities that I've been in, to have both cis and trans performers in the drag scenes. So that's a little bit of drag history, just a quick crash course. And there's a lot more that I obviously did not cover, but this presentation is more about my own experience with drag and my own kind of spiritual journey with drag. But I still thought it would be good to sort of give a little bit of a intro to drag culture for those that might not be as familiar. So I'm going to start talking about me now. I want to first give a disclaimer here. I'm going to be talking about my experience with drag, and I just want to put a disclaimer that I'm speaking for myself. I cannot speak for other people. I cannot speak for all drag performers when I talk about drag. Again, everybody comes to drag from really different walks of life and have really different attitudes about what they do. So I'm going to speak for myself. But I do think I have an interesting outlook into drag, and one that will hopefully resonate with a Quaker audience, because Quakerism and my Quaker faith has been very, very related to my work as a drag artist. So I'm going to talk about my childhood a little bit first. I was born and raised on a small farm in rural Wisconsin. I am a birthright Quaker. I was born into Iowa Yearly Meeting Conservative. Both of my parents were members, as was my older brother and I growing up. I have lesbian mothers, which is also worth mentioning. It's a unique part of my upbringing that definitely influenced me. But Quaker values was very, they were very central to my upbringing and how I came to be in the world, as was an exposure to LGBT issues and concerns through my parents being a lesbian couple raising kids in rural middle America. I also have a large extended family who are also all Quaker. I grew up very near my aunts and uncles and cousins. We went to Quaker meeting together a lot. We were in the same first day school groups for many years. Another thing I guess is worth mentioning, I'm the baby of the family. I'm the youngest of everybody. So I think growing up, I always felt perhaps a need to find myself and differentiate myself from my family, and to become my own person in a way that I just think I felt that stronger being the youngest of a very closely knit family that grew up together in the same faith community. Growing up on the farm is and will always be a huge part of who I am. I'm connected to land. I'm connected to that upbringing in a way that has really influenced me. I was homeschooled for a few years, and it was during the time that I was homeschooled and at home with my parents that I came out as gay. I was 12 years old. And I actually didn't come out to my family first. The first people I came out with were my Quaker middle school friends. I was at a middle school youth retreat. It was a Northern Yearly Meeting youth retreat in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I came out to a few of my friends, and they really helped me come to terms with this and grow confident enough to come out to the other people in my life. I actually think I have a picture on the next slide. Yes, the picture up in the upper left-hand corner is a few of my Quaker middle school friends. They lent me some of their clothing that they had bought, and I think a little bit of makeup, and I got done up, and it was a watershed moment for me. It was also around this time that I discovered the show RuPaul's Drag Race, which I mentioned a little bit in the drag history portion. I was immediately captivated by this. I had always been attracted uh, to the high femme, to things in television and media that celebrated and showcased femininity, sort of high femininity, that I considered at the time. But with RuPaul's Drag Race, I remember finally seeing myself represented in media. I saw people who were assigned male at birth expressing femininity publicly and confidently, and joining forces collaboratively to create art and to perform. And seeing that representation, people talk all the time about how important representation in media is. It was truly life-changing for me to see this. So it was around that time, I think I was 13, when I discovered this. I started exploring, at the time, what I would call sort of cross-dressing or femme presentation. I wasn't quite doing drag yet, but I knew that I wanted to. I knew that that was something I wanted to do, even at age 13. So I came up with a drag name. I named myself Christina Washington at the time. Christina came from one of my favorite pop artists, Christina Aguilera, and Washington was actually the name of the road that I grew up on. The farm was on Washington Road. So it's a combination of that. And I found that exploring femme presentation was easy, and I had the privilege to sort of explore this expression in private, living in such a remote area, living on a farm. I had the ability to express myself in the way that I saw in my head, without fearing for my safety or even worrying about being judged by other people. Because there were not other people where I grew up. The nearest neighbors were probably about a quarter of a mile away. So yeah, I started exploring it. The difficult part of exploring more feminine presentation in those days was that I was being raised by two Quaker farm ladies, and there was no makeup in the house to speak of, not a whole lot of fancy clothes, mostly overalls and work pants and work boots and beekeeper uniforms. So perhaps some good costumes, but not necessarily the glitz and glamour that I was looking for. So for many years, I relied on bed sheets, and my mom had a fabric closet for sewing that I would, when nobody was home, I would raid the fabric closet and make some sort of drape some outfit and take it outside and live this part of myself that needed to get out every once in a while. And I continued to do this for the rest of my my childhood, my adolescence. Through high school, I hid this exploration into feminine expression and into drag from my parents. My lesbian moms were very, very accepting of having a gay son, but when I first told them about my interest in drag, they were very concerned with drag culture, its relationship to sort of alcohol and gay bars, and their experience with drag culture being misogynistic and degrading towards women, or sort of mocking of femininity and of women. And I remember after that first conversation, instead of starting more conversations, I just sort of hid it from them for several years, which today I regret. But at the time, it seemed like the path of least resistance, and that's what I did. But by the end of high school, I did start to open up and do a little more public femme presentation. I went to school in what I say was like light drag for a couple Halloweens. And yeah, you can see, I think in this slide, yes, I went as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz one year. On the right is actually, it was a few days before, it was 2014, before our gubernatorial election in Wisconsin. And the candidate Mary Burke was the Democrat running against the incumbent Scott Walker. And so I dressed up as Mary Burke and had a vote for Mary Burke pin on, and went to school. I couldn't vote, but I went to high school dressed as a gubernatorial candidate. I performed at an orchestra concert my final year in drag as well. And then one of the my most memorable performances at Christina, as Christina, was actually at FGC. I was the last night of the high school program, and a few of my dear friends from FGC helped put me together, and I performed in front of the high school program to a very, very supportive audience of young friends. And that was definitely a moment that also solidified my interest in drag and my desire to have it be a part of my life and what I do. So I had dreamed of doing drag for many years. I recognize, and I do recognize this as an issue with drag culture, especially historically. I think it's changing for the better now. But as a kid, there weren't a lot of spaces outside of nightclubs to perform in drag. The history of drag being in nightclubs has to do with the fact that gay bars were one of the few safe spaces for gay people for many, many years. I hope that this is something that will continue to change in the next few years with drag. But growing up, I didn't feel I had a lot of opportunities outside of nightclubs. But when I was getting close to of age to go to nightclubs, I decided to make my dream of doing drag professionally, taking it seriously and doing it as a professional drag queen. I decided to make that a reality. It was during my first year of college in Atlanta. So I decided to do it during my first year, and I actually dropped out of school. It was also around that time that I came out publicly as non-binary, which I identify as non-binary. I think I mentioned that, but and I decided to change my drag name from Christina Washington to Pam. And I did this because I decided I didn't want a drag character, but a drag persona that represented the other side of who I was. The feminine within me was always an authentic part of myself, an authentic part of my identity. And I wanted my drag persona to be an outlet for that authentic side of myself. And Christina, I had felt was a character I had created out of necessity, and she had a very important place for me as a child, but coming into adulthood, I needed a more authentic persona. I started doing drag in Madison, Wisconsin. At the time, my parents were preparing to sell my childhood home. And so I did drag in Madison for a few months, quite a few months before I started on my own journey. But at my debut show, and this is my next slide here, my debut show, both of my moms came to watch me, which I feel really, really blessed, really lucky that I had both of my parents there, that we managed to reach an understanding around drag. By the time I decided to pursue drag, I think, developed an understanding for where they were coming from. And it was really helpful for me to hear their experiences with misogynistic drag queens, because it told me how I didn't want to be in drag. It was a really helpful lesson for me to figure out how I wanted to act and present myself in drag to the world. And I also, I had made the decision that this was what I was going to do, and they came along, and I think really came around and saw what it meant to me and what it had done for me and for my confidence and for my happiness. And they came out to the first show, and we all had a great time. And I'll always remember that night. The picture on the right is a picture that I made to announce when I came out as non-binary. At the time, I had this sort of understanding that I had two sides of me, which now I look at that and I think, oh, that's too binary even for me now. I have many sides to me. But I had finally discovered and figured out how to express this femininity that was always a part of me and always so important to me. And this was me showing the world that I had. It was both me presenting myself to the world differently. So my parents ended up selling the farm that I grew up on, and I moved to Chicago to pursue a drag career. Chicago was and is today one of the most active, biggest drag scenes in the country. It's a really, and there's so many incredible drag artists there. What I didn't know moving there was that so many incredible drag artists meant that it was also very, very competitive. And there was a lot of really talented people there. And I had been doing drag for a mere 4 or 5 months when I moved there, and was trying to make my way in a city with people who had years of experience and many who were working professionally in theater as well. And I learned a lot, I would say, but it was a tough go for a baby queen in Chicago. But what I took from Chicago, I lived there for 7 months, was life-changing. It was such valuable experience to me. Chicago, especially the drag and the queer scene that I was spent my time in, and was my social, my community there, was very, it was very gender progressive. Chicago is a very progressive city, but the queer scene in particular was, I say very gender progressive. And when I moved to Chicago, my intention was to be a drag queen. And so when I moved and started meeting people, I introduced myself to the community as Pam. And what ended up happening was I moved in and introduced myself as Pam, and people got to know me as Pam. And I actually ended up living my life as Pam the entire time that I lived there. Most people didn't know my government name, didn't know, any other name for me but Pam. And and I would come in and introduce myself as Pam and say my pronouns were she, her, hers. That is the pronouns that people would use for me. And it was life-changing for me to have people treat me and socialize with me in a way that wasn't totally face value. It didn't matter if I had a beard and a mustache, if I was out of drag, if I was in drag, if I was, it didn't matter what I looked like. I was Pam to people. And that was really, it was really validating. It was really validating to have that part of myself recognized, even when I wasn't going out of my way to express it physically in a way that I was trying to get other people to see a part of me that people wouldn't usually see. It was just who I was. I introduced myself to Chicago as Pam, and I was Pam no matter what I looked like. And that was, very, very powerful. What I looked like also varied quite a lot in Chicago. Chicago, just like the being very gender progressive, the drag scene and the standards of drag are very progressive there as well. People do drag of all sorts. There's a lot of bearded drag queens, a lot of drag kings, a lot of drag performers who do sort of avant-garde, really avant-garde looks, and a lot of people who, club kids they're called, who really just do sort of off the wall sort of presentation. And so I really explored when I lived in Chicago, all sorts of different ways to present myself. And I would do femme drag. I did bearded drag. I don't have the picture here, but I dressed as a drag king and did my makeup as the drag kings that I saw in Chicago did once. I worked at Target at the time. I was not making enough money doing drag to support myself, so I got a day job, and so I would take plastic Target bags from my work and create outfits out of those, and so that was, I think this was the juxtaposition, was that in Chicago my gender expression varied a lot, was kind of all over the place, and yet people treated me as I introduced myself to the world, and didn't just assume based on what I looked like who I was. And I think the power of that is what I took from Chicago, what my time in Chicago taught me. And then I moved back to Atlanta. I wasn't making a lot of money. In Chicago, I was kind of scraping by with my job at Target, and I decided I wanted to return to university and finish my degree. So I decided to return to Atlanta. I really missed Atlanta. Atlanta is my home currently. It's a city I feel very much at home at now, and so I decided to return. But moving back was not without its challenges. I was suddenly seen as a man all the time again. And upon moving back, I also didn't have an outlet to do drag anymore. I didn't have as much time. Being a student, I didn't have nearly as much time, free time to do that. There was a lot less opportunities in Atlanta as well. And I did perform at a few bars that I didn't really like. I didn't really like the culture of. And this was something that I realized in Chicago too. As much as I love drag, I don't love working in bars. I don't like the bar scene particularly. The art of drag is wonderful and inspiring to me. But from the bar owners who hire and employ many drag performers, from their perspective, the job of a drag performer is to increase bar sales, to sell alcohol, to get people in the bar. And as much as I loved performing, that aspect of the bar culture and drag was not wasn't what I liked to do. So I moved back to Atlanta. I tried to work at a couple bars, didn't really work out. And I was having a hard time figuring out how drag fit into my life. Having tried being a professional drag queen in Chicago and then being a student again, I was having a hard time figuring it out. In the meantime, I did host my university drag show. The picture on the left is from when I hosted the drag show at my university. And I would do drag for, I'm studying photography at school. And so I would do some drag for photo projects and for assignments in the classes I was in. But I still didn't feel like I had figured out how drag fit into my life and how I was going to do what I loved in a completely new situation. And it was difficult, but this was a way in which, for all of the ways it's negatively impacted my life, I found COVID and the new pandemic lifestyle in some ways to be a blessing for me. I really credit COVID with helping me figure out how I could do drag on my own terms. Most of these photos are from the pandemic. I have continued to be doing a lot of photography, both for school and for myself. And I realized that yes, the pandemic meant I wasn't doing drag for other people. I wasn't doing it to be seen a certain way by other people. I was doing it for the joy of doing it myself and because I love doing it myself. And many of these were done for photo assignments. But the other thing that actually was very exciting last year was I was hired by the Raphael Warnock campaign in Georgia. We had a big Senate runoff race directly following the presidential election, where they were hiring students across Georgia to be social media influencers and encourage young people to register and vote in the Senate runoff. And they found me as a drag queen and said, "You look like you're a student in Georgia. We'd love if you would be part of this campaign." And so that was at that point one of the most meaningful things I felt like I'd ever done in drag. I didn't leave my apartment. I did it all from my apartment. And I set up my camera and the light and the photo backdrop and made a little sign and posted it online all from home. And nobody saw me in real life. But the senator I was campaigning for narrowly won in Georgia a few weeks later. And I am grateful that I got to be a part of that. And I don't know if I influenced 1, 5, maybe no people, I won't know, but it felt like some of the most meaningful work I had done in drag, and really reminiscent of what drag was about for so many years, which was motivating people to be involved politically and to fight for a cause they believed in. And that's what I did, even during the pandemic. The other thing that happened during the pandemic for me sort of happened parallel to my sort of figuring out how I wanted drag to fit into my life, which I still have one more slide that I'll come back to. But I started to love my masculine side for the first time, maybe ever, but at least my first time in a decade during COVID. I think growing up and coming out as gay at such a young age, and with such supportive family and friends around me, I knew that society was telling me as somebody who was assigned male at birth to hate my feminine side, to suppress femininity, to disrespect femininity. There's a lot of societal pressure from society towards men to be anti-fem, and I think with the support and clarity I had coming out, both coming out as gay and as non-binary a few years later, I really rebelliously loved my feminine side, and without really knowing it, ended up neglecting my masculine side for many years. And I can't tell you exactly why, but I think the COVID pandemic and finding that I wasn't being perceived by others every day, because I was so isolated. I lived alone the last couple of years during the pandemic. And so that isolation really allowed me to see myself without the influence of other people seeing me, and recognize and settle in to the fact that I do have a masculine side that I love and is just as much a part of me as my feminine side. And that was another a very powerful realization for me. So this comes to my final slide. This was for a photo project, actually for a class, one of my photography classes, and we were tasked to remake an artist's album, like an album cover from one of our favorite artists. And I approached my professor and asked, I'm actually studying music in school here as well. It's my other major is music. I hope to be a musician and to publicly release music by the time I graduate. Would it be okay if I instead created a mock album cover? And so this is what I created. And I don't know if I'll actually end up using it or not, but this felt like a culmination of many, many years of self-discovery and sort of a very long personal journey. It's different in that the photo I showed, I think a few slides ago, shows two people of different sides, but I'm one person. I'm one person, but I am both Tommy and Pam. I'm equally Tommy and equally Tommy and Pam. And a name is just a name, but I figured out, I think, that my drag persona is It's how I want to be a musician. I want it to be my musician persona. A lot of people have stage personas or stage names in music, and Pam feels like the perfect way to use drag professionally and continue to be a drag artist, but using my own music, doing it on my own terms, and doing it authentically, while continuing to listen to myself and recognize that transformation is a part of life, and the nature of self, that we transform over our lives. And so I think just as Tommy will transform, Pam will transform, because I am both, and we're going to transform together. So that's the end of this presentation here. I'm going to speak directly to you all now. So my next, I just kind of referenced my next topic here, which is it's about transformation and about transformative power, which is a huge part of drag. Obviously, face value of drag, transformation is big, but yeah, Quakers talk a lot about transformative power and transformative experiences. I think it's a really central part for many Quakers of Quaker faith and Quaker spirituality. And yeah, this is where I'm getting into drag as a spiritual practice for me. Drag creates a physical transformation, in my experience, that can parallel an internal or a spiritual transformation. I think in our society today, we have become somewhat obsessed with self-identity and with labeling ourselves, labeling our identities. And I think that this comes from a very progressive and a good place that has benefited society a lot in many ways and many instances. But I think also in labeling ourselves, we sometimes maybe limit ourselves when we label ourselves too much or stick too stringently to who we've decided we are in the world. Drag has been, drag for me has been a major outlet into self-discovery and self-expression. For me, as an adolescent, it was where I, for the first time, really, I think in my life, got to decide myself, who I was going to be, and how I wanted others to see me. And those are two separate pieces of the drag transformation. There's the piece of saying, I feel this spirit, I feel this way inside, and I want to show it to the world. But for much of our lives, people go along with who everyone else sees and tells you are. We're born infants. We're assigned a gender at birth. We're given a name at birth. And we are told growing up for years and years by all the people around us. Our names are repeated. Our names are used to describe us. The pronouns that we've been assigned at birth are used to describe us. And drag for me was, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, a place where I could say, okay, this is what everybody else has been calling me. This is how everybody else sees me. But I'm going to be Christina. for a while. I'm gonna wrap myself in this sheet and I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna be Christina for an hour. And that was incredibly transformative. Not just, and drag continues to be that, not just physically transformative for me, but really internally transformative. And I think there's also again, I think I recognized this before a little bit, but I've considered myself a drag performer or a drag queen long enough at this point in my life to know that who I am has changed over the years. Who I am has changed a lot since I was 13 years old. I changed my drag name because of this, but I expect myself to continue to change, to continue to transform as life shapes who I am over the rest of my life. And I think that drag has helped me embrace the process of transformation in a way that I couldn't, or at least I struggled with more before practicing drag at all. As a child, I hated change. As I think many children do. But practicing drag, I've found that I embrace change more readily, because it is part of what drag is for me, is to recognize that you can make yourself look however you want, but you can also let the internal guide who you are and how you are in the world. And in that way, it's a spiritual practice for me. It really is. When I started doing drag, I had no intentions of it being a spiritual practice. I didn't think of it as such. I approached it as a hobby originally, and then as a career. And it has always been an outlet for self-expression. But I never thought of it as a spiritual practice until a lot more recently. I'll return to one of the quotes that I think I began the presentation with at the end of the presentation, because of I think that's relevant to this subject as well. Changing the superficial allows, and again, I'm talking from my experience, has allowed me to let the labels of my self-identity fade away. And there is power in this, in the self-determination of the external that has required the internal, the spirit, that of God in me, to guide how I will present myself. We are malleable in spirit. We are shapeshifters in spirit. Shapeshifting physically heightens that spiritual experience for me. My realization that this was a spiritual practice, a spiritual part of my life, happened during COVID as well. I wasn't doing drag a whole lot before, but especially once the pandemic began, I didn't have the opportunity, or wasn't, even part of it was an opportunity, but I wasn't doing drag for money or for social reasons, for professional reasons, for any sort of to be seen in drag by other people, that was out of the equation. And I found, although I didn't do drag for probably the first 2 or 3 months of the pandemic, that I still had this desire to do it for myself. And so I did. I ended up doing it for myself, by myself, in my apartment. And I think that was the realization for me, that I wasn't doing this just for other people. I wasn't doing this to be seen by other people a certain way. I was doing this for the practice of doing it, because the practice of doing drag itself was meaningful and powerful for me. And part of it is that I find doing makeup to be a calming, meditative process, the sort of the physical process of it. But it was deeper than that too. It wasn't just the process of putting on makeup. It was that I had this desire to transform myself physically, to free the spirit within me. And the other piece, of course, for this is that drag continues to connect me to my femininity. While I've become more comfortable with my masculine side recently as well, my feminine side is still very, very important to me. And while I know who I am, and this is especially, again, more relevant as we move out of, well, we're not moving out of the pandemic, but as the pandemic changes, as our lives change with the pandemic, I know who I am as a non-binary person. But most people, most of the time, perceive me as a man. And while I'm more comfortable with this, it's still important to me to be perceived as my whole self by the people in my life. I don't think there's any question for me that being who you are, not only with yourself, because I have reached a level of comfort with myself and with the fact that I will change over my life, but with the other people in your life as well, the people that you spend time with. Being who you are and being seen for who you are, it makes, at least, again, I should speak for myself, it makes me whole. And for me, wholeness is part of spiritual well-being. So there is the process of drag that is spiritual for me, and there's also the connection to femininity and the being seen with my community, with the people in my life, the people that I connect with, seeing my whole self. That is also spiritual for me. I'm getting towards the end here, I think, of what I have to talk about. Christina was this character that I created as a child that changed my life, and a very necessary and important a character in my life that allowed me to explore and embody my own femininity. And when I was able to do that, I was able to connect with my whole self, be seen for my whole self, and reach a level of spiritual depth with myself and comfort and oneness with God upon doing that has changed my life. The character name has changed. Pam is more authentic. Pam is me. Pam is that of God in me. And I let the spirit guide who Pam is, much like at least I strive to let the spirit guide who Pam is, much like I strive to let the spirit guide who Tommy is. And yeah, I just want to close again by saying I truly believe we're all God in drag. Um, and with that, I thank you so much for coming and joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure to be here at PYM.
OMG, Tommy and Pam, it's been so wonderful to have you here with us. And I'm actually curious whether you would like to make space for Q&A in this moment. Since we have a little bit of time, there might be people who want to ask you some questions now. We could probably do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. I guess I should advertise too. We have a Q&A scheduled if you want to come speak with me in a smaller group tomorrow at 11:30 Eastern, I believe.
Yes, 11:30, and the Zoom links for that will be in the memo email that goes out every morning. So folks will get that in their inbox tomorrow morning. Well, I've already seen hands raised. So why don't we get started with letting people ask questions? Steve, why don't you ask your question first?
That's me, Steve Thompson.
Steve Thompson.
Thank you, Pam. I noted the way you described Chicago. They were talented drag queens. And so there was a bar to hit. And there's that on one side, and then there's also the spiritual discipline on the other, which doesn't have a measure necessarily. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really good point to bring up. Yeah, I was sort of, I think I would say in my time in Chicago, that was for the most part before I had really started considering drag a spiritual practice. And yet it already was. And yet it was something that had great meaning to me and was hugely important to my life and hugely personal. And it was very, very difficult to go to bars, to venues where there was drag. And in Chicago at the time, there was way more talent and way more performers than there were opportunities. And so a lot of the time I was entering unpaid competitions, and it was a lot of competitions where it would be, you know, sort of like 10 people performing and one person wins. And to sort of be bringing something so personal and so important to me, and putting it out there for an audience that didn't care about it as much as I did, and then usually losing competitions and not being as good as the other people in this sort of, yeah, the arbitrary zone of judgment that I found the bars created was really difficult. And that's been a hugely different part of my drag practice since moving to back to Atlanta, and doing it more on my own terms when I want to, is that I'm not competing for anything. I'm doing it because I love it. And it's because it's a part of my art, and I can judge myself and say, oh, I wish I had done XYZ, or oh, I could improve on this or that. But it was very difficult to have yeah, to be judged in such a competitive and harsh environment. I learned a lot, and I'm very thankful for it, but I'm also happy to have found other places to be sharing what I do.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. How about Claire next?
Pam. Awesome, baby. Pam, please help me. I sort of need a tune-up on this. Listening to you, as Pam and then talking of Tommy. And I got this profound feeling that you are loved. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, I have a lot of love in my life.
How your experience with Quakers? Are we loving you? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I can't tell you how many people I've told in the last few weeks about the fact that I was coming and giving this keynote presentation here at Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and how many people were just floored, frankly, floored that not only was my, you know, my faith community, did I come from a faith community that was tolerant, you know, tolerated and you know, low key supportive of the fact that I did drag, but they invited me to talk and speak, be a keynote speaker at their annual sessions about what I do. I think a lot of people were very surprised to hear that any faith community would be, yeah, not just tolerant, but that supportive and that interested in drag and how it relates to our spiritual lives. So yes, I feel absolutely very supported by the Quakers in my life. My home yearly meeting, by FGC. I mean, again, one of my first ever drag performances was at the FGC high school program. And I remember that specifically because of how enthusiastic and supportive all of my Quaker young friend peers were at the time. So yes, I have a lot of love and a lot of love from Quakers, and I'm thankful and proud to be a Quaker. I really am.
Well, Pam, I have to make a confession to you. I think I'm in love with you. You radiate a kind of spirituality that goes so deep, and frankly, I'm surprised, gladly surprised. And as you're speaking, it's like, oh my God, what am I feeling here? And it's like, you are beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thanks, Claire. Tyler M.
Hi, thank you for calling on me, Zachary. Pam, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us. And my question is, I'm a 67-year-old lesbian who's spent some time in the late 80s into the 90s trying to, back when I was involved in another denomination, trying to advocate for LGBTQ people, and, you know, took some flack for that. And, you know, we're in different times now, and there's a lot of, I think we're in the same world, but also in different worlds, because I'm a lot older. And so what would you want from an old dyke who's been in a long-term relationship, who's just exploring Quakerism?
That's a good question.
How can I help you?
Okay, well, welcome to exploring Quakerism. That's exciting. I hope that you've had a good experience thus far. It's interesting you bring this up and talk about this. I feel like I've had a lot of discussions and sort of and really both support, but also challenging dialogue with my lesbian mothers, whose experience with drag specifically is mostly from the 80s for the most part. And it is a different world. It's the same world and it is a different world. I think you're right about that. And what you can do to support, that's a tougher question, actually. But I think what you're doing, being here today, listening to my journey and being a supportive audience member is huge. I think continuing to ask and listen to other people's experiences, and keep an open mind, but also don't be afraid to share your experiences too. I think that's the big piece, is when my parents and I didn't see the same about drag, it didn't have to do with the fact that we really had any deeply held disagreements. It was a fact that we had very different experiences for very, different generations, and hadn't really listened or put ourselves in each other's shoes until we did. And I think developed a much greater understanding that ended up making all of our lives better. So maybe that's a bit of a vague answer, but just continue to ask people about themselves, about where they're coming from, who they are, and to share who you are too, because I think the reciprocal benefit between sharing experiences between people who are of different walks of life, of different generations, of whatever, is extremely valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. And okay, Pam, I think we have enough time and energy for 2 more questions.
Yep.
Okay, so let's have Reba Gable go first.
Thank you, Pam, for just showing the beauty of your life. When I used to go to drag shows, I thought about how beautiful they were, and it wasn't the feminine presentation, but the way you've captured your story. I can see it's that I was watching the beauty. So my question has to do, you alluded to your photography and your music, and it seems that you're tapping into the spiritual life has given you freedom or rooted in creativity. I don't know whether you could just comment on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always been a very musical person, a very artistic person. That's always been a huge part of my life. And also, especially music for me, I probably recognized at somewhat of an earlier age than drag. Music is also a spiritual practice. And I think it is for many, many people, actually. I think that's a commonly acknowledged spiritual practice for many people. I think the change recently is sort of the combination of drag and photography and music, how they've really all kind of come together as one in what Pam does as an artist. They really all benefit each other quite a bit and go together practically. But yeah, no, I think also more recently, my music has been, since I returned to school, I've been learning the basics of music production, doing a lot of songwriting, doing a lot of more direct creation, writing my own music. And that has absolutely been spiritual and very challenging, very, very challenging, I think. It's been so hard to start being a songwriter. It was easy in theory to be a songwriter. And then I think as somebody who, my spiritual life is really important to me, and I want to create music that has meaning and reflects who I am and what I want to say to the world. That's what I want to do, and I know it, but it's learning how to do it, and the practicalities of doing that it's been very, very challenging. And so I hope to continue to work at it and hopefully get to a place at some point where I feel like I've created something that does reflect does reflect my spirituality and speaks to people from a place inside. Yeah.
Oh no, you won't. She's not there.
Thanks, Reba. Jody.
Really, Pam, I just wanted to thank you for bringing us joy. You have made me very, very happy because there's just so much, there was so much truth in what you've had to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jody.
All right, and I think one more question from Pete.
Hi, Pam, thanks. Asking about the songwriting. What's the sequence for you? Or is there one? Do you hear a tune and then begin to think of words? Or do you think of words and then make up a tune? What's the way it works?
That's a really good question. And the answer is, I'm still figuring it out. I've done many. I think the most effective I found for me has been to start with melody, actually. I think especially I'm writing a lot of, at this point, and this could change too, we all transform over our lives. At this point, I'm sort of writing pop music, so sort of, 3.5 minute songs, first chorus, bridge, chorus, sort of approaching the learning process from a more standardized thing. And with that music, melody is the most memorable part. And so I've really been recently starting with melody, finding lyrics to accompany that, and then instrumentation finally. It's actually the complete opposite of what I used, well, not the complete opposite, but I, for many years, would always start with chords and then would write some lyrics and then come up with a melody after everything. I don't think there's a right or wrong way, and I haven't quite figured out what's the right way for me. But I think, yeah, at this point, I've found that melody is usually the easiest place to start, and everything kind of falls into place once you have that central melodic idea. The rest kind of sensibly, the rest of the pieces go together easily once you have that central idea. So.
Well, thanks a lot. That's fun. You're in the company of a lot of Quakers, and way in the background, there wasn't much music that was out loud. We have found our voices, fortunately.
I'm happy to be a modern day Quaker. For that's one of the reasons I would say. I love that we have, as a faith, accepted music for its presence in God as well.
Amen. And amen to the ministry you've shared with us tonight, Pam. I think I feel moved just to thank you 3,000 million times